know who it is. Versus stealing, we have no idea, right? We have no idea who steals, and not just that, the repercussions for somebody. It's like, I don't know.
On our final show today, we sit down with the executive director of the AI Institute and founder of Boston Dynamics,
like anyone else?
Mark Raber, to discuss the culture of
yes,
robotics
oh man,
research.
Miskeen, I remember, man.
We'll bring highlights from the finalists of the Dialogue Robot competition. Take a final tour of organizations around the world, from the Technology Innovation Institute,
right? It takes time,
to Guardian Robot Project that
that's
reaches tour of organizations around the world, from the Technology Innovation Institute.
It takes time.
To Guardian Robot Project that reaches tour of organizations around the world, from the Technology Innovation Institute.
It takes time.
To Guardian Robot Project that reaches tour of organizations around the world, from the Technology Innovation Institute.
It takes time.
To Guardian Robot Project that reaches tour of organizations around the world, from the Technology Innovation Institute.
It takes time.
To Guardian Robot Project that reaches tour of organizations. You know, all his aunts, right? All of these people, they're ineligible to marry. But here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, I mean the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he adds to this, لا تنكحوا المرأة على عمتها وخالتها. Do not marry a woman and her paternal or maternal aunt. That meaning, at the time I'm married to a woman, I'm not allowed to? I'm not allowed to marry her aunts. Yes. I'm sorry? Yeah, during the time of marriage. So the thing is, like, there are some marriages that are conditional. So for example, when a man is married to a woman, he's not allowed to marry her sister, right? He can't marry her sister, and at the same time, he's also not allowed to marry her aunts. The moment he divorces her or she passes away, they're now eligible to be married. Either or, yeah. Yes.
So like they're like mahram, right?
Yes. So, but not everybody's mahram. So for example, my sister-in-law, she's not mahram to me.
Okay.
But I'm also not allowed to marry her. Yeah.
So what would the ruling be pertaining to the woman marrying the son or whoever? But then, I think I read this in something, so I'm not sure. But she marries the man, but then they get a divorce. Now, would the father-in-law still be, I guess?
Oh, mahram? Yes. Yeah, he would.
In every sense.
Yeah, he would still be mahram to her. It's the same, like the same thing with, and the opposite would apply too, like the son-in-law.
The mother-in-law.
Yeah, so like the mother-in-law and son, she would still be mahram to him. Right. The only time that doesn't apply is if they were never intimate.
If they were, okay.
Right. Right. If they never consummated, then no. But the moment they consummate, that's it. حُرِمَتْ عَلَيْكُمُ الْمَيْتَةُ وَالدَّمُ, that you are forbidden to eat carrion and blood. And over here, the Prophet ﷺ, he says, أُحِلَّ لَنَا مَيْتَتَانْ وَدَمَانْ السَّمَكْ وَالْجَرَادْ وَالْكَبَدْ وَالطَّحَالِ, that we have been permitted to eat two types of dead and two types of blood, fish and locusts, liver and spleen. Why these in specific? Because they have a lot of vessels. Right, so the spleen especially, like the spleen actually has a lot of blood, but the liver and the spleen, they have a lot of vessels in them as organs. So many times when they're removed, there's still what? There's still blood in them, but the blood that stays. it's okay. No, I just saw her getting grossed out. So over here, the blood that remains in those, it doesn't harm anything, and it is permissible to consume. And over here, fish and locusts. When we say the two types of dead, because how do you define dead in Islam? Sure, yeah, you're right, but in terms of consumption. Okay, so anything that is not madhbuh, right? Anything that is not slaughtered is considered dead, whether it died from natural causes or unnatural ones. So, for example, if you have someone just comes and he just chops off the head of a sheep, can I eat it? Al-Khilaf, right? So that's a bad example. But an animal, like an animal that gets hit by a car. No, right? You can't eat that animal. You can't. I'm assuming it's dead, right? So if a person who hits an animal and the animal dies in that way, all of those are not permissible. So there are two animals that it is. So fish and locusts. Fish. How do we How do you slaughter fish?
You don't slaughter.
Right, you don't. You have to face the qibla. Face the qibla. Bismillah, Allahu Akbar. Why do you guys think that is? How come I don't have to slaughter fish? Huh? Well, they don't breathe, right? That's they don't bleed, depending on the fish. Right? There's some have a little bit. Yeah. Some of them have open circulatory systems too. So I mean, it really depends. Right? Yeah. Because they like the moment I take a fish out of water, what happens? It suffocates, right? Like, you know. So basically, they're already dying. Like the moment I take that fish out of water, like I have like a lot of beautiful imagery today, right? So like, talking about like. I'm talking about organs and fish, right? So the fish, like it dies automatically, and it's very difficult, right? Just imagine that the moment we had to fish, the moment I bring it in, I have to what? I have to cut it, right? I have to slaughter it. And it's extremely difficult. It's extremely challenging. Like locusts. Something. No, I don't need any sugar. What do I do with locusts? You just crunch them. They make good tacos. Has anybody had locusts? You guys know how to cook locusts, or how do you? You just cook it. Well, you can't eat it raw, but usually I think they just like they'll put it on a stick and then like marshmallows, you know. But the same thing, like so here by extension, I can say this for anything that lives in the ocean. And I can also say this for any type of insect, right? That these things specifically don't need to be slaughtered, right? I don't need to take a mealworm and say Bismillah, right? You know, so those things you can just consume.
Any insect is not just locusts?
Yeah. So I mean.
What about the like shark meat, crocodile, and all that?
Oh, that's fine. I think there's so the Hanafis, they have problems with the bottom feeders. So like crustaceans. So you're talking about like lobsters, yeah. So those they have problems with. I'm sorry.
Shellfish.
Yeah, shellfish in general, because again they say that they're all bottom feeders and they're not tayyib. Everybody else is okay with them. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I was surprised I had to say the same. So.
No, you're good, man. You go ahead. Eat your oyster. Huh? Yeah, sharks are fine too. Yeah. There's nothing.
Like the carnivores?
Huh?
Oh,
Yeah.
they eat other fish.
Because they eat other fish, and they're in the ocean. The problem comes in like. So you have like crocodiles that spend their time on land and in the water.
So you can eat crabs and lobsters, right?
Yeah. Enjoy, man. Enjoy. Yes. Oysters are. I don't. You guys have had oysters?
Yeah.
It's like it tastes. It's like really. It's like snot, man. Like. Yeah. I tried it. It's like this weird cold snot.
You know
Yeah.
Close your eyes. It kind of tastes like what
It tastes like. Really?
Close your eyes.
Oh, what inab? It's like wrapped like grape leaves.
The inside kind of
No, it does not. Yeah, that's actually what I'm saying. It does not taste like that. It has like a weird snotty texture. It's so weird. But I mean, alhamdulillah. Yeah.
The extension, can you go back?
Sure.
For fish and locusts being applied to all insects and all seafood, what happens to liver and spleen? Is it just those two? Or is it
Yeah. So these are from land animals. From land animals. So when you're talking about like cattle, and the reason they're mentioned specifically is because the amount of blood that's in those particular organs, which is really interesting. Like the heart isn't included because the heart actually doesn't have a lot of blood compared to these two. Like it stays in the things. Yeah.
You may want to give a context that blood in general is not a lot except for these two cases.
Yeah. So.
So you said
The excess blood, because the thing is, blood you have, in general, you have two types of blood, right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He talks about blood, He said, ad-dam al-masfuh, which is the spilled blood, right? So when the blood is spilled, all of this blood is haram, right? I can't take it like a cup and like, like my juice. It's not. So it's like, it's not, huh? Yeah, the blood just makes, like I have this thing, I don't know.
versus what's the permissible blood?
Yeah, so the permissible blood is whatever blood is.
The excess
It's yeah. So whatever is still in the animal, it's actually permissible to consume. The problem comes in with these two organs in particular because they actually hold more blood than muscle, they hold more blood than other organs, etc. So people, when they cut into this, like they're going to come across more blood than they would in other organs of the
So
animal.
you gotta wait, or you gotta...
No, you can consume it. It's permissible to consume. So basically, the Prophet ﷺ, he's actually giving an exception to that. Say, hey, the blood that's in there, don't worry about it.
Case, but for liver and spleen, it is permissible.
Yeah. So because the thing is, like even steak cuts, when you take what happens? Like you see some blood. But that small amount of blood is fine. It's not a big deal. Except if you're a Jew. Like Jews actually have to salt their meat. So what they do is they'll take the meat and they'll put it on salt to actually drain all of the blood out of it. Can hadith abrogate the Quran? This is a theoretical argument. And there are no actual practical examples to this. Some people, they try to use like really specific examples, but it at the end it just really doesn't work. So over here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so for example, the prohibition of alcohol. Alcohol initially was it okay or not in Islam? It was, okay. So eventually it became abrogated, but how did the abrogation come? Right, it came from the Quran. Right, it came in the Quran. The permission came in the Quran and the prohibition came in the Quran. So over here you have one verse abrogating another. Can the hadith now abrogate the Quran? This is the question. And like I said, this is a theoretical argument. There's no actual practical application to this. You don't have any instances of this. And even scholars, they would say, even theoretically, are not allowed. You know, it's not something that would be allowed. But because we don't have any practical way of implementing this, it's a theoretical argument that the different fuqaha and the different jurists actually had. Any questions?
I thought there was.
They try to use example of wasiyah, but the thing is, it's like that's more defining an absolute versus abrogating something, because the wasiyah, the bequest is still in place. It's not saying that okay, bequests are not, it's not, one isn't saying bequests are permissible, the other one's saying bequests aren't. It's just putting a limitation on who it can go to and how much it is. It's a definition more than it is a abrogation. So we're going to talk about, inshallah, the next section, which is what is really important, is the historical development of the hadith sciences. There are 5 major time frames that are important to examine to help us understand this. Is during the time of the Prophet ﷺ and the companions, the time of the students of the companions, who are known as the tabi'een, their students, atba' tabi'een, then the golden age of the sunnah, and then 5th century hijri. And I will talk about why these are the 5 stages that are very important in helping us understand this. So the initial stages, this was the time of the Prophet ﷺ. This is the beginning of the science of hadith, and which began with the actual beginning of revelation. How so? So if the Prophet ﷺ, just imagine this, right? So the community is small, it's in Mecca, and the Prophet ﷺ, if he would tell something to one companion, what would happen?
He would tell to another one.
Right, they would tell each other, right? They would tell each other, well, I heard the Prophet ﷺ say this, or he did this, or he ordered this, or this was revealed today, right? So you already had these conversations happening, where they would actually relay information about the Prophet ﷺ to each other. Yeah?
It's similar to what Umar asked one of his friends to sit and...
Yeah,
and then he
and they would tell each other, and they would exchange. Absolutely, and there we have many more examples of this, inshallah, that we'll definitely get into. So the first science to appear related to hadith science is the science of narration itself, which we had talked about. The companions narrating to one another. The first narration that's recorded, it comes by way of Khadija radiallahu anha, and her retelling of the coming of Jibreel to the Prophet ﷺ at the cave of Hira with the beginning of Surah Iqra. So here, this situation that happened with the Prophet ﷺ, the first person to receive it the first person to deal with it was Khadija radiallahu anha, and she went on and she told, and we have a very famous story. What did she do? She went to her uncle. She went to Warqa ibn Nawfal. And she told him, like, hey, listen, this happened to my husband. And he said, okay, bring him. Let's talk to him. And he said, you're going to face a lot of hardship. You're going to face a lot of difficulty. The people are going to oppress you. And if I'm still living, I will stand by you. I will stand by you. The companions, they were meticulous in taking note of everything the Prophet ﷺ did. They tried to spend as much time as they could. Very famously in the Hadith of Umar radiallahu anh, with another companion, he said, listen, why don't we alternate days? I'm going to go to the market one day, you spend the entire day with the Prophet ﷺ, and we'll switch. We'll keep going back and forth, and we'll inform each other of what we missed in that time frame. So they also understood their roles and responsibilities. Was every single companion a narrator? No, they weren't. All of them had different roles. All of them, they supported each other in different ways, right? Not everyone was a statesman. Not everyone was a soldier. Not everyone was a scholar. And they all had to complement each other in one way or another. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He sought to teach the companions a lesson concerning narrations, and He says, what? يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا إِنْ جَاءَكُمْ فَاسِقٌ بِنَبَإٍ فَتَبَيَّنُوا أَن تُصِيبُوا قَوْمًا بِجَهَالَةٍ فَتُصْبِحُوا عَلَى مَا فَعَلْتُمْ نَادِمِينَ. That believers, if a troublemaker brings you news, check it first in case you wrong others unwittingly and later regret what you have done. So this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's telling the companions here. And not only is He telling the companions, but this troublemaker himself is who? He's a companion, right? So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's talking to the companions and telling them from amongst them that this person who's coming to you with this piece of information himself is a troublemaker. And here He's talking about a companion of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And He's saying that, listen, if you get this piece of news, you now have the job to what? To confirm it and to verify it. Make sure that this piece of news is correct. Over here, now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِذْ تَلَقَّوْا بِأَلْسِنَتِكُمْ تَقُولُونَ بِأَفْوَاهِكُمْ مَا لَيْسَ لَكُمْ بِهِ عِلْمٍ وَتَحْسِبُونَهُ هَيِّنًا وَهُوَ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ عَظِيمٌ. That when you took it up with your tongues and spoke with your mouths, things you did not know, you thought it was trivial, but to Allah it was very serious. Right? So this is very important because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, why is He talking to the companions like this? He's basically telling them that what? I'm sorry?
You took responsibility.
Ahsant.
You have responsibility.
That you have a huge responsibility in front of you. And what is that responsibility?
To make sure what you're saying is true.
To make sure what you're saying is true, because you are going to be the people who? What?
Carry.
Oh, you're going to be the ones that carry the religion. You have this huge responsibility in front of you. And you are going to be the ones that carry the religion. And this is something the companions took to heart. It's something that they understood. Which is why not every single one of them narrated. Right? There was a select few of them that would narrate, they would corroborate, they would sit in the gatherings, right? They would do all those things, but not because of their huge responsibility that they knew they had, not everyone had to narrate. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, وَإِذْ جَاءَهُمْ أَمْرٌ مِّنَ الْأَمْنِ أَوْ الْخَوْفِ أَذُوعُوا بِهِ وَلَوْ رَدُّوهُ إِلَى الرَّسُولِ وَإِلَى أُولِي الْأَمْرِ مِنْهُمْ لعلمه الذين يستنبطونه منهم ولولا فضل الله عليكم ورحمته لاتبعتم الشيطان إلا قليل. That whenever news of any matter comes to them, whether concerning peace or war, they spread it about. If they referred it to the messenger and those in authority among them, those seeking its meaning would have found out from them. If it were not for Allah's bounty and mercy toward you, you would almost all have followed the shaitan. Again, this idea of responsibility, this idea of a message, this idea of carrying this forward and how they were responsible for it. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He admonishes them and tells them, like, listen, you need to be aware. You need to be careful of what you're saying. You need to be careful of what you're doing, because you are going to be the ones that carry the religion forward. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he himself, he made efforts too in reminding them. And what are some of the things that he said? He says, كَفَى بِالْمَرْءِ كَذِبًا أَن يُحَدِّثْ بِكُلِّ مَا سَمِعَ. It is enough for a man to be considered a liar if he narrates everything he hears. And he's telling the companions this. And he also says in a very famous hadith, مَنْ حَدَّثَ عَنِّي حَدِيثًا وَهُوَ يَرَىٰ أَنَّهُ كَذِبٌ فَهُوَ أَحَدُ الْكَاذِبَيْنِ. That whoever knowingly narrates a lie on me is one of two liars. Either he himself is a liar, or the one he is narrating from is a liar. So even here, he sallallahu alayhi wasallam is reinforcing this idea of making sure that everything you say is true. So there are a number of unique elements to this era of narration. This idea of precision, this idea of religiosity, and it's important to understand that when we talk about adala, when we talk about trustworthiness, when we talk about religiosity, if a person is religious, how will that affect how precise he is? Right? If a person has taqwa of Allah, how much more so will he scrutinize his own narrations? Right? He's going to do it more. Why? Because not only does he feel it's a responsibility, he feels it's an obligation. He feels this is a religious responsibility that he has to make sure that he fulfills. So there are a few things that I think it's important to understand. Memorization was a big part of Arab culture. It was a huge part of Arab culture. Why?
Because they didn't have access to any writing and reading.
Or not just that. So the reading and writing tools were definitely limited. There's no doubt about that. But did the Arabs even want to read and write?
It was Arab poems.
Not really. It was Arab poems, but they actually would take pride in what? In their memory. They would say things like, I'll memorize a 4,000 line piece of poetry in one sitting. I just need to hear it once, and I'll respond to you. This idea of having this photographic memory, of being proud of their memory, even their business transactions, they wouldn't write them down. Lineages, they wouldn't write them down. They would take pride in how they memorize all these things. So this idea of taking pride in this, they would use it as a means of storytelling. They would use it as a means of actually against their enemies. So whenever they wanted to spread news, what would they do? They would come up with poetry, because poetry was the quickest way to get across Arabia. You would have somebody memorize it. He would take it to another tribe. They would memorize it. They would take it forward. So this is how you actually gain notoriety. Notoriety was gained through this transmission of this poetry. So the more eloquent you were and the better versed you were, the easier it was to bring pride to your tribe and to bring pride oftentimes to yourself. So this idea of culture having a role in precision is something that sometimes is difficult for us to relate to. But I want to use one example. And most of you guys are young. But before cell phones, and if I wanted to call somebody, how would I call them?
You had a notebook or you memorized?
Right, either I had the phone number memorized or I had a notebook. Right, this is the only two ways. If I didn't have their number memorized and it wasn't in my notebook, they weren't getting a phone call, right? Like, I didn't have it all saved on my cell phone. But why isn't it important today? Because the need is gone. So when you develop a need for something, some people are like, how is it possible to memorize it? Because there's a need, right? When there's a cultural need and a cultural push for something, the other thing that we used to memorize that we no longer memorize today, directions, right? If I need to get somewhere, I would either have to memorize the directions or I would have to write them down. Like you guys, like I said, man, you guys are too young, but going to the nearest marker and then calling from a payphone, and they would come in their car and you would follow them to their house. Now, if I need to go to somebody's house, there's two ways to do it. Either I can take their address, or I'd be like, send me a pin, right? Because sometimes the address doesn't show up. So these are all, again, when you have a cultural push to something, it becomes easier to visualize why people acted in a certain way. So like I said, even in our culture, like even in our American culture, not that long ago, right? Like we're talking about like maybe 25 years ago, maybe a little less, right? So it's not even that long ago. You're talking about like, 20, 25 years ago, where you had to memorize people's phone numbers, or you had to write them down, or you had to memorize directions. It's not strange to have an entire culture that didn't have books, right? Didn't really write, didn't really read. It wasn't a big thing to them. Even when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He talks about ummiyin, when He talks about those people who are unlettered, those people who don't know how to read and write, what is the opposite of that? You guys know? What is the opposite of ummi in the Quran?
Ummi? Who doesn't know how to write?
Yeah, someone who doesn't know how to read and write.
No.
Literate, sure. What term does Allah use?
Jahil.
Ahl Kitab. So even reading and writing, who do they ascribe it to? Because they used to read their scripture. And that was a big part of their tradition. So the people who used to actually read and write were who? Ahl Kitab, the Jews and the Christians. Meaning that the Arab themselves, they didn't view themselves as what? As Ahl Kitab. Like we don't have a book. We don't read, we don't write. Like we don't even want to do that. That's not our thing. So, again, it's important to understand some of the cultural context behind some of these things. During the life of the Prophet ﷺ, Umar went to the Prophet ﷺ to ask him whether he had divorced his wives or not, to which he responded with no. Umar then asked him, can I inform the people? The Prophet ﷺ replied with, yes, if you would like to. What does that tell us? This is not very well. This is verification because he had heard, so he went to go verify from the Prophet ﷺ himself. And then what did he do?
Frequent update on his affairs.
Right, not just an update. He went and he said what?
Permission.
He got permission to what? Inform. Today we would call this what?
Fact check.
We would call it a blue check mark, right? No, this would be. This is a hadith, right? He's informing the companions about the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So when we talk about this idea of narration starting very early on, it started during the era of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because there are a couple things here. Number one, he came to verify. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam didn't ask him, "What are you doing?" None of your business. You don't need to know this. He came to verify. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he verified with him, and he told him what exactly happened, and he gave him permission to narrate, showing that he sallallahu alaihi wasallam actually what? He trusted him. So this idea of trust was something that was established during the lifetime of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Imam ibn Tha'labah, he came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and asked him, Muhammad, one of your messengers came to us and claims that you claim that Allah sent you. Is that true? And he replied with yes. So again, this idea of confirmation, this idea of relaying information, it is not something that was strange at all. After his death, the Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, he came to a gathering of companions and said, I beseech you by Allah, did the Prophet ﷺ say that seeking permission to enter a place or enter a home should be done 3 times. And if you do not receive permission, then leave. The story goes on to say that Umar, he told Abu Musa to find a companion of the Prophet ﷺ who would support his narration. So Umar was there and he heard Abu Musa al-Ash'ari say this. And he said to him, he's like, you better go find someone to corroborate what you have to say. And if you don't find someone who's going to corroborate you, I'm going to flog you. So Ubay ibn Ka'b, so Abu Musa, he went to Ubay. He's like, yo, Umar is telling me I need to find someone to corroborate this hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, otherwise he's going to be. So what did Ubay do? Ubay, he sent a young companion. Why did he send a young companion?
To show that everybody knows.
To show that everybody knows. He's like, man, this is a hadith everybody knows. He's like, yeah, take this kid. He'll corroborate for you. So he sent this child with him, again, to show Umar radiallahu anh that this hadith is corroborated. And not just that, if this young Sahabi knew this hadith, is there a chance, do you think that Umar knew it as well? I want you to think about that.
Yeah, of course he knew.
Of course he knew. Why did he do it then?
He wants to show the people.
He wants to teach the people. Like when it comes to narrating the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, don't play around. This is a very serious issue. This is a very serious affair. So, inshallah, I want to talk more about the adala, or the religiosity, or the trustworthiness of the companions, inshallah, next time. And there's another issue that I want to spend some time on as well, which is the precision of the companions. So, as far as their religion is concerned, we have a number of ayat, right? And we have a number of hadith, and we'll talk about some of them. But I want you guys to think about, all right, well, if we said in hadith there are 2 conditions, right? That the adil and dhabit, that if they have to be trustworthy and precise, trustworthiness it comes from the Quran, very clearly. How do we know they were precise? And I want you guys to think about that, inshallah. I'll see you guys next week, for those of you coming back for the hadith class. And then we have our tazkiyah class after Salatul Isha. Salatul Isha is inshallah in 4 minutes. Just want to give you guys some time to make wudu. Wallahu a'lam wa sallallahu ala khayri khalqin. Nabiyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sallam. Any questions before we end? No?
No.
Alright. Jazakumullah khair.